The world I live in is filled with countless dungeons. First, a cavern-type dungeon was created, then a labyrinth-type dungeon appeared. Later, a challenge tower-type dungeon was formed. In short, this is a vast world of dungeons, and along with them, there are countless hidden treasures. Because of this, there are adventurers who seek to conquer and claim all the great riches this world offers. However, not just anyone can become an adventurer. Only those who have been chosen can do so. In this setting, we see our hero carrying a huge bag that seems to be very full and has a seal on top. Next, he approaches a somewhat suspicious-looking man. This man explains that a permit is needed to enter the dungeon, but he immediately becomes curious about the item Inji is carrying. He is surprised to see a bag of that size. Then, our hero thinks to himself that he has become the adventurer's bag. His name is Ni, and he is a white-rank porter. Next, the adventurer shows his impatience and asks, how can a porter arrive later than the adventurers themselves? Commenting that young people these days are just hopeless. At this, Ji feels a little embarrassed and apologizes, explaining that it is his first time in this area. However, the man asks why he is alone and where the other porters are, adding that the Porters Association must have already received an advance payment of 50 coins. In response, our hero smiles slightly and proudly declares that he is the porter who costs 50 gold coins per day. However, the adventurer is skeptical of that claim. Raising his voice, he asks if the boy thinks this is an easy task. He then explains that this is a dungeon where they should have normally sent at least 4 or 5 porters, and questions what exactly he plans to do. In a somewhat harsh tone, the man asks if he thinks he can carry everything they need and also whatever they find inside the dungeon. He dramatically asks if he will be able to bear even the weight of their lives. Finally, he demands to know if he has understood and orders him to go back to the Porters Association for reinforcements, warning that he will cause trouble otherwise. Surprised, our hero replies that he is carrying enough for 4 people. Nevertheless, the man insists that, as he already said, it is impossible for one person to carry all that. At that moment, Ni reflects that reactions like this from adventurers are quite common, and that even if he charged 5 times the usual rate, he would still earn less than 10 coins. For that reason, instead of giving a long explanation, he knows the most effective thing is to prove it directly. So he drops his huge, decorated bag on the ground and starts picking up the adventurer's luggage, somehow managing to fit everything inside his bag. Seeing this, the adventurers are visibly surprised. One of them asks, "What is that?" And they soon conclude that it is a magic bag. Smiling, our hero explains to them that this is all he needs to carry everything. Intrigued, the adventurers ask him where he got the bag, if it is heavy, and comment that they would like one too. Would love to have one. A bit embarrassed, the young man apologizes and clarifies that it's a unique bag that others can't use. He then asks if they are going to hire him as their porter now. One of the adventurers tells him not to make such a fuss, and adds that even with a magic bag, a porter isn't that impressive. Despite that, the same man decides to hire him. He introduces himself as Jeffnam, a gold-rank swordsman and leader of the Fallen Wolf Party. However, he raises his fist and sets a condition. He'll have to earn that gold, and if he doesn't work as hard as 5 porters, there will be consequences. Our protagonist wonders if that guy is really the leader of the adventurer party and realizes he seems quite strict. Right after, the leader orders them to grab their gear and prepare for the expedition. Excited, Jin thinks that's all fine with him. After all, he is a professional porter full of energy. He believes something big will happen before this dungeon crawl is over. Thus, the adventurer party continues on its way, enters the dungeon, and our hero decides he will make sure everyone is satisfied in the end. The reason he earns so much more than others isn't just due to his skills as a porter, but also because of the overwhelming satisfaction of the adventurers he works with. As they advance through the dark interior of the dungeon, it becomes clear that the adventurers dedicated to conquering these places face countless dangers. Just then, it seems one of them is about to face one. Our protagonist thinks that traps could be triggered at any moment, not to mention enemies that might ambush them. One of the adventurers starts to move forward, but the party seems ready for combat. Their leader points to some creatures and says, "Here they come." Then a fierce battle breaks out in the area. Jeffnam bravely faces his opponent. Conquering a dungeon is full of unpredictable variables, and that, inevitably, creates great stress for everyone involved. The leader asks if he didn't tell them not to let their guard down and questions if they are nervous. One of the men comments that he was reprimanded because of the other guy, and a small argument starts, while our hero thinks that this is precisely the reason why he decided to become a porter specializing in this niche market, which even seems to excite him even more. Right after, he gets the party's attention by reaching into his huge bag and tells them that after all that non-stop work, they must be starving. He adds that he has brought them some snacks. The men are stunned by what they are seeing and start to salivate, wondering what it could be. They are also impressed by the smell. They ask him what it is and are shocked to see all the food. Our protagonist has prepared a real feast using his secret porter skill, the dungeon restaurant. Without hesitation, the men start to eat. They say it's something special and that it's still hot, as if it were freshly made. Another one, thanking God, comments that even the salad is fresh. With tears in his eyes, one of the adventurers says that he had only been eating jerky and rock-hard bread. Surprised, they ask him if the bag has the ability to keep food fresh, and they are even more amazed at the thought that he could even cook it. Excited, our hero says it's something like that, although inwardly he thinks that the truly important thing is something else. Then, he says out loud that they haven't seen anything yet. He seems to put his hand in water, and in the next moment he begins to fill something up. He has just used another of his secret skills as a porter. It's called Arkham Paradise. One of the adventurers is in shock. He wonders if he's at a resort, as he feels like he's in a hot spring in the middle of a snowy field. However, upon opening his eyes, he realizes the environment isn't exactly like that, and it still seems incredible to him. Nevertheless, not everyone in the group is happy. The leader shouts, asking if they think they're on vacation, and then says that doing this in a dungeon is complete recklessness. He adds that the atmosphere is so warm that it doesn't even make them want to fight, and his companion nods. In the end, they conclude that they have no choice but to accept the situation. Jeff Nam admits that he took a risk, and that he didn't really believe that all of this was worth 50 gold coins, to the point of having considered asking the guild for compensation, but seeing the porter's skills, he confesses that 50 coins is a bargain. Then, our hero asks if this isn't what conquering a dungeon is really all about. He explains that outsiders might think the difficulty lies only in facing powerful monsters, but that the environment and stress can also cause failure. He adds that failures due to bad food or lack of sleep are common stories in this line of work. He states that porters in dungeons depend on adventurers, and that to make money, adventurers need to complete dungeons, so he does everything he can to help and ensure success, and concludes by saying he doesn't consider it a great sacrifice. In turn, the most veteran adventurer watches him, surprised. He says that calling all this no big deal is almost endearing, and that they rarely receive even a third of that treatment outside of a dungeon. In fact, he confesses that he had never experienced it. He claims that after receiving all that care, he feels recharged as if he could face any enemy that awaits them ahead, and tells our hero not to worry about how the expedition will end. However, Nji looks a bit embarrassed and asks the man about his clothes. Then, as they advance again, our hero thinks that conquering a dungeon can be a smooth process. As another battle begins, he realizes that, considering the group's skill, facing the monsters is simple. However, the real problem lies with the boss monster, since they always bring a series of unpredictable variables with them. Jeff Nam activates a power in his sword and curses at the boss, saying that it's cunning. He then orders the group not to give it room to maneuver and to keep it under constant pressure with attacks. For its part, the monster roars loudly and prepares to counterattack. It tries to hit one of the adventurers, but he manages to dodge it with agility. Then he counterattacks, firing a bolt from his crossbow and hitting the creature's leg directly using his web skill. The monster clearly feels the impact and furiously lashes out at the adventurers, unleashing a powerful blow, but the party is vigilant and manages to defend with their shields. In response, the leader prepares to attack with his weapon and uses a swordsman's skill called multiplication, managing to slice the monster into several pieces. However, the creature doesn't give up and begins preparing a breath attack, but once again the party is ready. Jeff, aware of the dangers of the situation, senses the threat imminent. Meanwhile, our hero watches the battle from a safe spot. Upon analyzing the enemy, he realizes that this time, the boss is a B-rank monster, a lizard. Considering the party's skills, he calculates that the probability of success is over 80%, although he knows that the 20% chance of failure cannot be ignored, because if the adventurer party fails, it would mean the porter's death, which is not an option. So, taking something from his bag, he thinks he must intervene. He reaches in, wondering what he should take out, until he finally seems to find what he's looking for. He knows the party's offensive power is sufficient, so creating a small opening might be enough to resolve the situation. Although he feels a bit sad thinking he's going to waste such an expensive smoke mushroom, he prioritizes clearing the dungeon. Therefore, he has no other choice. The challenge, however, is how to hit the target. At that moment, the monster lunges directly at the leader of the party. So, our hero thinks that no matter how unpredictable the monster's attacks are, he can aim right at the moment it pounces on one of the adventurers. So he throws the mushroom at the monster. It just watches the object approach, which hits it head-on and releases a thick cloud of smoke. The creature seems to feel the effects of the attack, The party leader shouts, calling for the porter. Finally, our hero raises a flare and announces that now is the time. Jeff Nam, pleased with the situation, reacts immediately. Running towards the monster, he replies that he got the message. He starts climbing onto the back of the beast, which is still in a defensive state, and prepares to deliver a devastating blow, while the creature seems to notice what's happening just at the last second. Then, the party leader lands the final blow, completely taking down the beast. He watches it with a satisfied expression and then congratulates everyone on a job well done, ordering them to collect the loot. Ji thinks that the dungeon clear went smoothly in the end, but that feeling of excitement was short-lived, as the atmosphere immediately changed and the reason was disappointing. The rewards were terrible. For a B-rank monster, they should have gotten at least 20 magic stones, but only 5 dropped, and the rest was junk. To make matters worse, most of the dungeon was filled with common monsters like goblins. In other words, if you compare the effort and costs of clearing the dungeon with the rewards obtained, the result was a complete waste of time. And as if that weren't enough, those few items had to be divided among the 4 team members. That's why our hero thinks that maybe because of that, the joy of having finished the dungeon vanished and the atmosphere grew tense. The party members began to argue about how to divide the reward, proving that even dividing something so scarce can be complicated. However, cheering up again, he concludes that such matters are for adventurers and don't concern him, since as a porter he has a fixed payment and it doesn't depend on how much they earn. He decides that before the situation gets worse, it's time to wrap things up. So with 2 bottles in hand, he thanks the adventurers for their hard work and adds, asking if they aren't thirsty and offering them a drink. The party watches our hero standing next to the defeated monster. The leader smiles and comments that he even takes care of the party's needs after the dungeon, also mentioning the smoke bomb he threw at the boss. He adds that finding him in this dungeon might have been the greatest treasure they obtained. In response, our hero laughs and says he's just being flattered for the day, modestly adding that he only offered a little help with his skills. However, one of the adventurers questions the term modest skills, saying that the more he watches him, the more impressed he gets. He explains that Nji pulls endless wonders from that bag, and that maybe its contents are worth more than the dungeon's own loot. Another jokes, asking if that bag might also contain piles of money. The most veteran adventurer adds that, after all, they're talking about the porter who charges 50 gold coins. Thus, agreeing with the captain, he affirms that the greatest treasure on this expedition was finding him. However, right at that moment, the atmosphere starts to turn strange. Our protagonist notices that something isn't right, wondering why the mood has changed so abruptly. Then, something smashes directly into one of the liquor bottles, shattering it to pieces. Turning around, he sees it was a crossbow bolt that flew right past him. Shocked, he yells, "What the hell was that?" Just as a bolt flies toward him, he luckily manages to dodge it at the last second, but he ends up falling to the ground, confused and wondering what's happening. The older adventurer coldly apologizes, saying it was a mistake and that he was trying to end things painlessly. He tells him to think about it. An adventurer's job is to risk your life, and that the reward can't just be handed to you on a silver platter. Another one chimes in, telling him not to hold a grudge and explaining that they're in a tough spot with their payments. Then he adds, "Let's be honest, a bag like that is too much for a mere porter to have." As he gets back up, our hero begins to understand. So this is how things often end. The job of a dungeon porter usually ends in death along the way. And if he were to die, they could just say he was killed by a goblin and no one would suspect a thing. No matter how hard he tries, he's always treated like a tool. Suddenly, the expressions of those who once admired his dedication twist into greedy stares, as if they now see him only as loot. But surprisingly, he is neither shocked nor disturbed. He knows this is how things usually go in this world. In a world where your destiny is predetermined by your birth, the treatment of others, porters, one of the lowest-ranking jobs, has never changed. He remembers how, when he first got his bag ability, he drew the scornful gazes of those who mocked him. They told him that with an ability like that, he couldn't register as an adventurer, that he should settle for being a mere porter, and that if he really wanted to join expeditions, he could only do so as a dungeon porter. Thus, the world made him know that he couldn't be an adventurer and forced the label of porter on him, so he wonders if these guys think the same way. Meanwhile, one of the adventurers asks if he gets it now and orders him to hand everything over and then die. At that moment, that same man lunges at him with his weapon raised, insulting him as a stupid porter who only carries bags. Without wasting a second, our hero prepares to fight, inwardly questioning if that decision to surrender is really his to make. He quickly reaches into his magic bag. The adventurer attacks mercilessly, but our hero manages to block the blow at the last moment with something he pulled from the bag. The attacker, surprised, asks if he seriously managed to stop the attack. Then, our hero firmly plants his foot on the ground and lunges toward him. He prepares to attack and strikes the enemy directly with his sword. Another, older adventurer watches in amazement as our boy now pulls a kind of axe from the bag and throws it at the bearded man, directly hitting his crossbow and breaking it. The entire group is stunned to see the weapon break, and the leader exclaims in disbelief, asking, "How can this be possible?" They wonder if one of their own comrades was just taken out. Jepham, filled with fury, yells that this makes no sense and asks why they can't take him down quickly. At that instant, our hero pulls a third item from the bag, and with a single motion throws all the liquid on his attackers. They scream that it's hot. Then our boy appears through the smoke wielding two weapons, completely focused on his enemies. With a single blow, he splits one of their shields in two, leaving the man visibly terrified. He then lands a direct hit that sends him flying backward from the force of the impact. Finally, our hero observes what's left of the group, who now look visibly nervous about the situation. The leader can't believe what he's seeing, thinking that this kid just took down 3 adventurers with his own hands. He wondered how that was even possible, considering that the boy was only white rank. Bewildered, he questioned who this young man really was. Staring at him intently, he asks him directly who he is. Smiling enthusiastically, our hero replies that he is a dungeon porter. Sometime later, the group of adventurers appears tied up outside the dungeon, and that's when our hero seems to notice something. A carriage approaches the location and he, waving his arms, shouts that he's over there trying to get their attention and make his presence known. Someone gets down from the carriage, a young woman who asks him if he is the registered porter, and comments that she heard about a crime that occurred inside the dungeon, which is why she has come to investigate. Her name is Petra, and she is an inspector. Looking around, with some confusion, she asks, "What exactly is all this?" Then, almost outraged, she demands to know, what the hell happened in that dungeon? But our hero tells her it's better if she hears the explanation directly from the ones involved. Then, a sound is heard coming from inside his magic bag. The bag plays the recording of the moment the adventurers were calling him too flashy to be a porter, and ordering him to shut up because they planned to kill him. Petra, surprised, exclaims that this is fascinating. The young woman realizes that it's a recording device disguised as a bag, and although she comments that the design is a bit ugly, our hero, now named Ni, explains that it's actually a bag that also records audio. Petra says that, in any case, she now understands that he was betrayed and they tried to murder him, adding that this is enough evidence. However, she confesses she is curious how a mere porter managed to take on several adventurers. Furthermore, she points out that it seems they have been poisoned with smoked mushrooms. Smiling, our hero asks her if she knows of those mushrooms. Petra replies that she knows enough to state they shouldn't be eaten, since whoever does will suffer various physical problems, in addition to facial flushing. Then he, with apparent innocence, explains that, in short, they ate provisions that had mushrooms among their ingredients, and just as they were about to attack him, the symptoms began to appear. He asks if she doesn't think he was lucky. After all, how else could a porter take on adventurers like them? Then, smiling again, he turns to one of the adventurers and asks if he isn't telling the truth. The man looks at him, knowing it's a lie. In reality, they did eat poisonous mushrooms, but it was a trap they had clearly fallen into. Excited, our hero was asking another question. He wanted to know if that man was really a gold rank adventurer. Despite not being white rank, they both exchanged attacks with great skill, and our hero seemed capable of facing him as an equal. He felt that something was off. Even after having spent so much energy against the dungeon boss, losing to a porter made no sense at all. In that instant, our hero wondered how someone could defeat even a goblin with such a slow sword. Then, he lunged at the adventurer with his weapon, while the other thought about how humiliating it was to be bested by a mere porter, whose provoking attitude made him lose control. Counterattacking, he tried to convince himself that he was just a porter and not to think about other possibilities. Nji, smiling as he fought, easily dodged the attacks, taunting him and saying, "Coming at me again? Try harder." He kept dodging while continuing to provoke him. The swordsman prepared to use his technique and began unleashing a flurry of slashes, but our hero continued to dodge without any difficulty, laughing and mocking him all the while. The group's leader, stunned by what he was witnessing, exploded with fury, calling the porter a damned bastard and unleashing a devastating blow that was also dodged effortlessly. Getting back to the main point, the reason they lost to a porter was clear. Surprised, Jeff came to the conclusion that it wasn't because the porter was so strong, but because he himself had gotten weaker. At that moment, he realizes that his body is suddenly changing. He wonders why this is happening to him and why he feels like he's going to throw up. Smiling, our hero asks him if he hadn't told him yet, and then reveals that he was poisoned. Nie explains that the food they ate earlier was laced with a za pulp toxin, masked within the flavor of the dish. He points out that it serves as a kind of insurance against shady employers like them. The group leader, writhing from the poison, calls him a bastard and yells that if that's true, then from the very beginning it was all a plan to lead them into a trap. However, our hero just smiles smugly. He asks the man how a delicate porter like him could deceive such experienced adventurers like them, and states that it was all just a safety measure, just as he had already explained. He clarifies that whether or not they were betrayed depended entirely on them, and that in cases like this he uses a catalyst to activate the poison's effects immediately. He adds that normally, after completing the dungeon, he gives them an antidote to drink, which completely neutralizes the poison. But he mentions that someone did something stupid. He recalls the moment he had 2 bottles in his hands and was offering a drink, and someone broke one of them. Now, visibly excited, he asks what he's supposed to do in this situation, explaining that he only has 1 bottle of antidote left. And even though everything happened that way, even now saying that they were poisoned sounds implausible. So the group leader says with resignation that it's fine, they just had bad luck and ate the wrong stew. Although inside, he wonders how he can accept having lost to a porter. He cries, regretting not having eaten the entire stew by himself. Meanwhile, the inspector seems to be contemplating everything she has witnessed. Finally, she says she understands and asks for the criminals to be taken away. He tells her that his work is done and asks if he can leave, but the young woman asks him to wait a moment and asks if he's heading to the city to catch a ride. Our protagonist seems a bit surprised by the offer and asks if it's free. Sometime later, the group is on its way to the city. She comments that it's a shame he had such an unfortunate experience right after arriving and that, on behalf of the Adventurers Association, she offers him an apology. However, he replies that it's fine and adds that porters are always treated like tools. The girl asks him if he really thinks so. She comments that it might be true, but there's something she needs to warn him about. Although she understands he wasn't at fault in this incident, she explains that not everyone will see it that way. She tells him that the adventurers he defeated belong to the Dawn Guild, an organization known for its arrogance and illegal activities. Therefore, regardless of the reason, if one of its members gets hurt, they will retaliate. So she recommends he stay on his guard for a while. However, in the next moment, she seems surprised by something. She gets our hero's attention, asking if he's listening, and he answers in a dull voice that he did. Then, the head of that thing pops out. Our protagonist says that he had already warned Gluttony not to show itself in front of others because they always get scared when they see it. But the little creature complains that it's hungry. The inspector shouts in fear, asking, "What the hell is that thing?" Embarrassed, our hero replies that it's nothing she should worry about, that it's Gluttony, and it's been living inside his bag for who knows how long. He explains that this creature is responsible for organizing all the items inside the bag. Before it started helping, everything was just jumbled together in no particular order. In return, it feeds on enormous quantities of magic stones. He then comments that, considering how chaotic this dungeon was, Gluttony must have worked quite a bit too. But beyond that, he says that now he can keep all the loot from the dungeon, which normally would have been split among the 4 adventurers. Feeling generous, he comments that he's in a good mood today and asks what Gluttony would think about receiving double the magic stones. This time, the creature begins to devour them happily. Petra says that it's the first time she's seen that creature and asks if it really eats the stones. Our protagonist replies that for him it's also the first time he's seen it do that, but he assures her that Gluttony is harmless. The girl says that it's quite fascinating and then corrects herself, saying that his bag is what's fascinating and that she's never heard of anything like it. Suddenly, one of the horses starts acting up violently. Everyone is startled by the situation. She asks what's wrong and why the horses are acting like this. But the soldier replies that he doesn't know, that they just started getting restless out of nowhere. At that moment, our hero seems to sense something. He looks back, thoughtfully, trying to identify that feeling. They remain there, motionless, while something strange seems to be happening. Then, our hero confirms it in his mind. There's no doubt. He realizes that it's a dungeon break and wonders why it's happening. He immediately calls the inspector and points something out, showing her. He tells her that he can clearly feel a dungeon break just beyond those mountains. Petra is taken aback by the possibility, recognizing that this is a huge problem, and asks him, "How could you know that?" wanting to know if he perhaps possesses some kind of magical detection artifact. But our hero replies that it's his instinct. She doesn't understand and asks him what he means by instinct. At that moment, intensely focused on the situation, he continues to feel that presence and says they don't have time to argue. They must move quickly before there are more victims. Petra thinks it's absurd that he can detect a dungeon break with just his instinct when not even she, an inspector, can do so. However, the little creature Gluttony seems convinced that it's a real break. It says that it likes magic stones and that it can smell them, so that must be it. It claims there's a strong scent of magic stones coming from beyond the mountains, and concludes with certainty that there's no doubt about it. Hearing that, Petra says she understands and that they must go investigate. He then explains that when a dungeon exists for too long, a catastrophic event known as a dungeon break can occur, during which the monsters inside go berserk and begin to pour out uncontrollably, destroying everything in their path. That is why it is crucial to subjugate every dungeon that exists in this world. So Petra confirms that they are indeed facing a break. She explains that the critical threshold was passed a while ago, and that the break could happen at any moment. Intrigued, she asks him how he can sense something like that from so far away. Our protagonist replies that he could never forget that sinister feeling. He then recalls a situation from the past, something no one should ever forget. Just how horrible things get when a dungeon break occurs. Petra wonders if this man has been in one before, but even if that were the case, how could he sense it from so far away? Naji says there is something strange about all this. Since it is a dungeon near a village, it is impossible that no adventurer has taken care of it yet. Petra nods and comments that according to the records, that dungeon had already been assigned. Our hero then asks her if she knows who accepted it and what their rank is. She replies that the dungeon is classified as D rank, and that the adventurers who took it were 1 mithril rank and 2 copper rank. Hearing this, our hero is surprised that a mithril rank adventurer was assigned to a D rank dungeon, which immediately arouses his suspicions. He adds that he needs to go to the village to confirm something, and asks Petra what she plans to do. She asks him if what is happening is related to his suspicions. She then asks a guard to transport the criminals to the prison in her place, and tells him that as a dungeon inspector, she will accompany him. Moments later, they both set off for the village, and sometime later, they finally arrive. Upon arrival, they encounter a strange situation. Our protagonist comments that something is definitely happening there, and Petra agrees. Some people are claiming that this should have been resolved long ago and that nothing has happened yet. They ask what will happen if a dungeon break occurs. A martial artist named Nero says they should take the matter to the party leader, but another man replies that it is not his responsibility. That man is Van, a necromancer. Venusla, visibly upset, shouts, asking what they expect them to do if their leader just disappeared. The villagers begin to shout, calling them bastards. Our protagonist thinks that he was right after all. Judging by the situation, his suspicions were correct. A dungeon no-show occurs when a high-ranking leader registers for a dungeon, but then a better opportunity comes up and they completely abandon the lower-ranked dungeon. Petra explains that of course the association imposes fines in such cases, but our hero asks if that is not basically just a slap on the wrist, and she confirms that it is. He then concludes that in the end, the adventurer can just abandon the mission and nothing happens. However, the people of that place lose everything when the break occurs that very night. He knows that even if they asked the Adventurers Association for help by the time they arrived, the village would already be in ashes. Besides, it's obvious those adventurers are just making excuses to shirk their responsibility. One of them claims they are victims too, since their leader abandoned them and now they're just wasting time getting blamed for everything. Van adds that if anyone has a complaint, they should take it to the Adventurers Association, since they don't have to listen to that, because according to him, they're not responsible. Our protag, watching the scene, thinks that adventurers are not heroes or saviors, but ruthless people who only care about their own gain. However, even with all that, they are necessary in situations like these, because only adventurers can deal with a dungeon break, not someone like him, a mere porter. The inspector comments that it's unfortunate, but they must evacuate the village because saving lives is the priority. Then, our hero repeats in disbelief, saving lives, and wonders if she really believes that's possible. Petra apologizes and asks him what he's talking about, to which he replies that he was just thinking out loud. Then, he says that winter is coming and for those who have lost their homes, how could they possibly survive a long winter? He tightly clutches an amulet against his chest and declares that it would be impossible and, right after, throws it forward, convinced that what this village needs now is not a porter. As he adjusts another golden necklace on his chest, he wonders why all of this is happening. Suddenly he gets excited and says to Petra, "Look what you have here. A dungeon break happening right in the village he had just visited." Then, he asks if it's true that whoever subjugates a break gets to keep all the loot without paying any kind of tax. The woman confirms that yes, that is true. He laughs, saying he just won the lottery. The adventurers watch him, wondering who that guy is. They question if he's really planning to take control of that dungeon. Both of them are surprised to see the color of his necklace and wonder if maybe he's a gold rank adventurer, believing that perhaps that's actually possible. Smiling gently, Our hero asks if they're thinking of joining in too and tells them that, in that case, he could split the rewards in a 9-to-1 ratio. Then he asks if they have a deal. Ji thinks that, for now, he will pretend to be an adventurer. Then, he calls the inspector and asks her what the penalty for impersonating one is. The girl replies that the fine would start at no less than 1,000 gold coins, if she is not mistaken. In front of them is the portal to the dungeon, a rift connecting to an unknown dimension and which, when it's recommended, should only be tackled by adventurers of gold rank or higher. It's an age-old battle, and no matter how difficult, you just have to defeat the monsters, but there's more to it when the opponent inside a dungeon is the space itself. Not even the most experienced adventurers can predict the environmental conditions before entering. This turns these dungeons into places that must be avoided, given the high probability of disappearance or death. Still, they are there to make a quick raid. The inspector reports that, after checking the dungeon's magical boundaries, she has concluded it will collapse in 1 hour. So that's all the time they have to clear it. But they know that 1 hour, under any circumstances, is a very tight margin, especially for a rift-type dungeon. Naji comments that they can only hope it's a simple dungeon, and if so, they can't afford to waste a single minute, not even a second. Determined, they head into the dungeon, cross the portal, and a flash of light envelops them. Petra watches, impressed. When they reach the other side, they see rocks floating in the air. Excited, the adventurers comment that a minute ago, it was nighttime, but this is clearly another world. One of them says that the story of the first special dungeon, subjugation by the adventurer Van, is just beginning, and the inspector also looks enthusiastic. Van adds that he'll do such a good job it will leave the association speechless. The inspector laughs and says he's only so happy because he doesn't know anything yet, adding that at first glance she thought they were doomed. Our hero admits that he thought so too, a bit tense. Naji says that this scene feels strangely familiar. Looking at all the stones leading to a structure high above, he comments that it almost seems as if everything was scripted. Then, the inspector tells him they'll have to climb for an hour and asks him how he was able to lie like that, smiling. He replies that there's nothing they can do now. He explains that if they had asked for help as mere porters, the adventurers would have simply ignored them, but by pretending to be a gold rank adventurer, he managed to get them to follow him. He adds that the situation is complicated, but if they don't subjugate this dungeon, a break will occur, and he asks her if that wasn't the reason she came. The girl confirms that yes, that's why she's there. Suddenly, Nero seems excited at the idea of the raid. She asks why they are so worried and claims this is precisely why slow humans are useless. Then, she crouches into a running stance, shouting that she'll get to the top on her own. She starts jumping between the rocks and climbing quickly. The boy looks worried and asks if that isn't dangerous. And suddenly, something happens to the girl. It seems an invisible energy grabs her by the wrist. She tenses up as she realizes something isn't right, and falls from above as if she were a puppet with its strings cut. The boy, annoyed, asks her if she's crazy and reminds her that even at the training camp she always acted like this, without thinking. She asks if he is scolding her, and he replies, angry, that yes, she deserves it because they learned that rift-type dungeons have curses and restrictions. The girl tries to defend herself, saying she knows that. In the end, Petra intervenes and says that everything is fine, but the first thing they must do upon entering a dungeon like this is to check for any active curses. As they wonder why they are chained, the girl explains that it seems to be a locational curse. They are connected by chains they can neither see nor touch. Then, Nero says that in that case, as long as they are bound together, the curse can't be activated. Our hero comments that tricks are no use, after all. They seem to work in this dungeon, but fortunately they have a full set of climbing gear. Nero is in shock seeing the enormous amount of stuff that comes out of the bag. Excited, our hero says they must move forward step by step. In this type of dungeon, the best strategy is to advance steadily without wasting energy by trying to climb quickly. However, they shouldn't go too slowly either. They have to maintain a constant pace. Therefore, he tells them to follow him, and to remember that since they are connected by invisible chains, they must not get too far apart from each other. He adds that they must advance while always maintaining a constant distance. Nero comments that the leader of the group is a bit slow and says he'll run ahead, but the boy objects. He tells him that instead of rushing ahead, they should follow the planned route, so they won't have to backtrack later, even if it's slower. However, he thinks that even following the planned path they could run into a problem, and it seems he himself runs into one of those unforeseen issues. He reflects that Fisher-type dungeons are always full of variables. Then he sees something strange. A stone creature opens its mouth and seems to eat one of the floating rocks. He thinks, "You've just found an unidentified monster. Its name is the rock-eating stone boar. It's a powerful creature, but not aggressive. so there shouldn't be a problem as long as it isn't provoked. Petra says she didn't expect to find one of those creatures in a place like this. She explains that, according to reports, its excretion is also quite fast. Then we see it spit another small rock into the air. She concludes that it seems to be changing the structure of the dungeon as it eats and expels stone. Fascinated, she says that the dungeon's ecosystem is incredible. Nero laughs and says she seems happy. The girl apologizes, saying it's the first time she's seen one of those in person, but she also points out that this is a disaster anyway, since the path they were following was completely destroyed. So there's only one solution left. Our protagonist says they'll have to throw hooks onto the stone boar and secure themselves with ropes. But there's a problem. If they fail and end up provoking the creature, the boar will become aggressive, and they have neither the time nor the power to deal with that. Van laughs at the situation and says, that's the problem. And as he begins to use some kind of magic, he claims that his time to shine has finally come. He tells everyone to pay attention to see how Van overcomes this challenge. He then uses one of his necromancer talents. Through some summoning fingers, creatures begin to appear, and in the next moment some Ragolins manifest. Our protagonist says it's wonderful, since summoning skills are uncommon. Petra comments that if those creatures can place the hooks, they won't provoke the boar. However, our hero starts to feel a bit tense, wondering why something feels strange to him. The summoned creatures begin to tremble slightly, and suddenly one of their heads turns in an abnormal way. Then he starts to realize that something isn't right with the way those creatures are moving. Nero comments that this was famous at the training camp. Van was known for not maintaining his summons, and they ended up exploding. She yells at him to shut up, explaining that controlling summons is like moving your right and left hand independently while looking in a mirror. Van replies that he'll do his best and that everything will be fine as long as they cross in 5 minutes. However, our hero says he doesn't feel at ease, since time is running out. So he orders them to cross quickly before everything explodes. Without wasting any time, he throws the hook, and the summoned creatures grab onto the rock, trying to secure it. By some miracle, everything seems to be going well. The porter asks them to hold on a little longer. As they go, he warns them that as long as the creatures are summoned, there is a kind of neural link with them. Our protagonist starts to cross, thinking that despite the setbacks, they are still having some luck. The group moves along the rope, and Naji reflects that his companion's skills are proving really useful in this dungeon. He believes those summons will make things easier. However, he starts to notice something is wrong, as only 3 minutes have passed. Van tells them to hurry because things have gotten very complicated. But our hero notices the problem isn't the rush, but that the conditions have changed. The boy does his best, but apologizes, saying he's about to explode. He explains that he can't control the cracks that appeared from hitting the golem's head, and that he's also suffering from increasing nausea. He's not going to be able to hold on. The surfaces of the creatures begin to crack. Suddenly, they burst, causing a huge explosion next to the stone boar. The creature seems to have felt the shockwave and looks visibly annoyed. The hook comes loose as its anchor is gone, and the group of adventurers is thrown into the air. Our protagonist shouts that they're done for, and orders them to grab onto whatever they can. He thinks that if they fall back to the starting point, they'll never reach the summit and that they must mitigate the damage no matter what. So he uses a secret technique of the porter style. At the last moment, he manages to ensure everyone's safety, and his bag launches them all back into the air with great force. They manage to land back on solid ground. Our protagonist asks if everyone is okay. Petra replies yes and thanks him, though she immediately corrects herself, calling him adventurer, but adds that they've lost a good deal of progress and wonders if they'll make it to the top in time. Naji states that there's no other option if they want to make it. From this moment on, he says that no one will be able to use their magic skills and that from now on they must get ready while he takes out special climbing gear used by porters. He explains that they will now ascend vertically to the summit and that they must not let their guard down even for a second. If one falls, they all fall together. He adds that the closer they get to the summit, the more traps and variables will appear. There will be areas with falling rocks, others that are frozen, and stretches that will test their physical endurance. Nero points to a strangely shaped rock, but our hero warns her not to get close, since it's an explosive rock. In the next instant, the girl screams for help while the boy asks how much further they have to go. Our protagonist says they're almost there, and to please hold on a little longer. The others protest, saying she has already repeated that more than 10 times. Nero comments that she wants to fight monsters, that she didn't become an adventurer just to climb mountains. Our protagonist replies that this time, he's serious, that from where he is he can see the summit and also the final boss waiting for them there. Excited, the adventurers celebrate finally finding a monster. Van says he will finally have his first official battle. The girl states that she will defeat the boss and prove something to those who classified her as bronze rank, while Van supports her, suggesting they didn't receive fair treatment. Our protagonist then seems to notice something important. Analyzing the physical abilities and talents they have shown so far, he deduces that they should not be classified as bronze rank, and thinks that maybe they were assigned that rank because one of them comes from a necromancer lineage or because beastmen have been enslaved for a long time. First, one of them comments that if something goes wrong, the leader will take care of it, and the boy nods. After all, he is a gold rank adventurer. However, our hero thinks the plan was for them to face the monster themselves. Then, the inspector asks them to stop for a moment and comments that something isn't right up there. She explains that the boss at the end of the climb is a serpent dragon, but that these creatures are not originally made of stone. She adds that if a dragon serpent is purple, there is no other explanation, unless it is already dead. Suddenly, the creature seems to open its eyes. Our protagonist, shocked, asks, "What did she just say?" A sword appears to be piercing the monster and it seems its owner is still there. A man is resting, leaning against the creature, wondering what all that commotion is about. Then he notices something from up high, observes our hero's group, and Naji wonders if he is sensing a murderous intent. The man watches them from his position, and in the next instant, he leaps directly toward them. The group of adventurers waits in silence, but something flashes past our hero, and the man instantly appears right next to everyone. He observes our hero standing beside him. The porter is impressed by his power. On his chest, he wears a distinct insignia, and our hero wonders if it is a rank, thinking that this can only mean one thing, that this incident is not a simple dungeon break. Finally, the man breaks the silence and says that this is problematic, adding that he thought that no one would enter this dungeon. He explains that this dungeon must be broken. Our protagonist reflects that there are many people like him who act with a very specific objective. Then the man says there is no need to complicate things and that it is already decided. Those 4 will die during the supposed dungeon subjugation, and that will justify the break. In this world, people register with the Adventurers Guild and receive a rank according to their power. The first and lowest is the white rank, granted to those who do not possess combat skills, such as porters, guides, miners, or guild staff. Next is the copper rank, the initial level to be officially recognized as an adventurer. Those who possess minimal combat skills are classified as copper, and they still have abilities superior to those of an ordinary person. Then there is the silver rank, reserved for adventurers who are veteran and skilled, capable of handling dungeons effectively. Most adventurers reach that level. After that is the gold rank, which is only accessible to those with extensive dungeon experience and exceptional skills. They become raid leaders. These are the standard ranks, although there are higher ones like platinum and mithril, which are extremely rare. It is said that those who reach these ranks are beyond human capabilities. Only those who transcend human common sense can obtain that level. And right there, being surrounded by the group, is a mithril rank adventurer. Our protagonist feels tense about the situation. He senses the man's aura, is genuinely impressed, and thinks that even if they all attack together, they could not defeat him. So he asks the inspector if she knows anything about that adventurer, and she says yes, because there are not many of that rank in the city. She tells him about the Dawn Guild, the same one she mentioned before for its arrogance, and explains that this man is the guild's raid captain. She finally identifies him as the berserker Turkin. The man comments that the girl's face looks familiar and realizes that she works for the guild. He asks what she is doing in this dungeon and if she is pretending to be an adventurer, reminding her that she is white rank. Petra says she would like to ask him a question and then addresses him formally, calling him Sir Turkin of the Dawn Guild. She asks why he has not cleared the dungeon yet, pointing out that it is about to collapse. She asks if it is not the duty of every adventurer to prevent that from happening. However, the man with a somewhat psychotic look questions her about this supposed duty and starts laughing like a maniac. He asks her what kind of duty she is talking about. He then explains that adventurers act only for their own benefit and offers an example. He asks if it would not be more profitable to let a dungeon break happen instead of clearing it. Petra, bewildered, wonders what he means, but our hero seems to have understood the situation. He thinks that he never believed adventurers were heroes or noble warriors, but realizing that individuals like this exist is disgusting. If this guy really plans to cause a dungeon break, then he must stop him at all costs. However, there is a big problem. Directly confronting someone of mithril rank would be madness, so for now he will take another path. With a smile, he feigns calmness and says it has all been a misunderstanding, that they are just adventurers who ended up in the dungeon by accident and unintentionally bothered him. Then he offers him a gift, as an apology, an exquisite skewer prepared by a master Durkin. The man, surprised, asks if that food came from his bag, and Nagi asks if he is not hungry after so much time in the dungeon. Our protagonist knows that confronting that scum directly is not an option, so he must make another decision. he decides to weaken him by other means. The man tries the food and finds it incredible. It is hot, with a flavor that seems freshly made, and he is delighted, stating that not only is the meat perfect, but so is the shrimp. Our protagonist thinks he should eat as much as he wants, but then the man comments that there's something special, that the flavor of the added ash mushroom is exquisite. Then he stares at him and asks if he really thought that dirty trick would work. Our protagonist realizes he's done for. The man prepares to attack, saying that this is payment for the meal. The attack is extremely fast and he barely has time to react. He takes the hit head on and is sent flying. The girl screams as she's chained to him, which causes her to be dragged along, but they manage to land on a nearby surface. She asks what they are going to do now. The man approaches quickly and mocks them, asking if they are really such rookies that they can't resist the curse of the chains. The girl gets on guard as the man lunges at her, assuring her that this dungeon will be their grave. He prepares another attack while she tenses up, waiting for the impact. Ivan yells at her not to just stand there and gets ready to join the fight. Then, a huge explosion shakes the top of the rock, and a cloud of smoke with fiery sparks rises in the area. From its center, a visored figure appears. Durkin is surprised and asks, "What is that brutal creature summoned? Could the boy be a novice necromancer?" Ivan, enraged, asks him if he's the raid leader who let them join the dungeon but never showed himself. The man replies sarcastically, saying he was wondering who the fools were that accepted the request for this dungeon that everyone else avoided, and now he gets it. It was them. He adds that he's heard they're a bunch of fools. Ivan tells Nero not to be scared, that when the raid leader returns, it will be 3 against 1, and they just need to hold out until then. Especially if the attacks remain physical, the golems can hold out indefinitely, so they charge into battle with the mindset of fighting like it's a training session. Durkin, excited by the fight, responds with a new, powerful blow that shakes the summit. Our protagonist is not in good shape, but he begins to regain consciousness as the girl asks if he's okay. She explains that she gave him emergency first aid, so he thanks her and says he must have passed out for a moment, asking how everything is going. She replies that, to be honest, it's not going well at all. She explains that Nero and Ivan are fighting with all their might. The girl prepares to launch a direct attack, but Durkin blocks it with ease. Then she spins on her feet to try another strike, but the man defends himself again without taking any damage and looks at her with a murderous glare. He grabs the golem by the head and spins it around, using it to smash Nero. And as was to be expected, considering that opponent, they won't be able to hold out for long. Our protagonist admits that he made a mistake. He should have considered the possibility that the poison wouldn't work. The girl, confused, doesn't understand what he means. Then he asks her if he can learn more about that guy. If he's mithril rank, then he must be famous. The girl confirms that he's right. She explains that in close combat he has no rival among the existing ranks, and that he has also completed a considerable number of dungeons. He is also known for his multiple clashes against other adventurers, which makes him a specialist, especially when he uses his greatsword techniques. He's famous for splitting ogres in half with a single slash. NG comments that luckily he doesn't have his sword at the moment, and the girl feels relieved. For his part, our hero says he was hoping to hear something like a weak point, but all of that is just discouraging. She adds that the big problem is that even if, by some miracle, they manage to defeat him, time would have already run out because they simply don't have any left. So no matter how close the goal is, they won't make it in time. Furthermore, she states that if it weren't for the curse of the chains, at least they could try to split up. Then, our hero quietly repeats the curse of the chains and at that moment seems to realize something important. He knows they can't see or touch them, but they are bound by a chain. That's a problem, because if one falls, they all fall. However, if he thinks about it from another perspective, maybe that's also a strength. If one rises, they all rise. That way they could turn a disadvantage into a solution, and perhaps that's the key to defeating both the mithril rank adventurer and the time limit at the same time. As he reflects, he tells himself that even if he's just a fake raid leader, or even if he were the real one, he must play all the cards he has in his hand. He knows that separately, each of them might not be enough, but if they combine their skills, they might have a chance. With that idea in mind, he asks Petra to analyze the terrain with her ability and calculate the distance. The woman replies that being so close, she can do it easily, even draw a map. Our protagonist smiles and asks her to do it quickly. Then, the woman uses her scout's talent and begins to draw with a magic pen, creating a 3-dimensional map of the area. The guy is impressed by the precision of the drawing and comments that it exceeds all his expectations, saying that she is a top-tier investigator, but Petra simply says that's just the basics. Then she asks him what he plans to do with the map, and he explains that he will use it to target the monster, that this fight isn't just against a human, it's also against a monster. NG explains that adventurers often face creatures stronger than themselves in dungeons, and asks Petra if she knows how they managed to defeat them. She replies that maybe with strategies based on experience, but the guy smiles and tells her she's wrong. Next, he begins to explain that the secret for adventurers to defeat superior monsters is to use dirty tactics, so that they win thanks to those unorthodox strategies. So to defeat that monster, he will also have to get his hands dirty. Suddenly, he jumps from where he was, and says he'll do it the same way, by fighting dirty. At that moment, something is thrown towards Durkin. Of course, he notices it and, smiling, catches the arrow with ease. Our protagonist thinks that he believed that arrow would work as a surprise attack. However, something unexpected happens. He uses a porter's trick, a well-aimed web shot. The enemy realizes that moving has become difficult. Just then, the protagonist appears in front of him. Durkin smiles and asks him if this is going to be a showdown. He charges straight ahead, believing he's confident now. But our hero, without wasting a moment, reaches into his bag and unleashes another porter's trick. A rain of mushrooms. The man watches suspiciously as mushrooms fly through the air. The protagonist announces the attack. Mushroom storm, mushroom barrier, dust and smoke cover the entire area, and Turkin gets irritated seeing everything clouded over, thinking this guy is a really annoying opponent. Van, meanwhile, seems gravely injured. Our protagonist asks if everyone is okay, and although they are injured, they reply that they are still holding on. NG is relieved, and asks Van if he can summon more familiars. The boy looks at his fingers, which are still regenerating, and confirms that at least 2 are still intact, which will allow him to summon 2 more creatures. The hero says that's enough, and asks them to listen carefully, because there is a way out of this. However, in the next instant, Turkin breaks through the spider webs, complaining that this is a nuisance and that he has never heard of a swordsman who fights this way. He wonders if his opponent fled with his companions to another rock, and mutters that this is all a pointless fight. Then, suddenly, someone appears near him. It seems that person is muttering something unintelligible. Turkin realizes it's a golem. He then comments that creating smoke is useless if it makes noise, so he lunges toward the direction the sound is coming from. With his fist wrapped in energy, he prepares to attack and unleashes another of his powerful blows, landing a direct hit on whatever is there. Smoke and debris scatter in all directions. The man seems somewhat satisfied with his attack, but the next instant, his expression changes. A golem's hand emerges from the fog and the creature leaps toward him to embrace him. Baffled by the situation, he asks how a golem can talk, but at that moment, he realizes the voice didn't come from the golem, but from that strange bag. Then, the bag claims that it has been kidnapped. Confused, Turkin wonders where he is and if what he's seeing is a rope. Noticing our hero is holding it, he suspects they plan to climb to the top while distracting him, but he asserts that now that they have been discovered, he won't be able to use that rope to climb. However, our protagonist responds by asking if he is really sure about that. He then appears to be doing something, and NG asks if they are far enough away yet, because they must move quickly before they're caught. Straining, the boy asks them to wait just a little longer and explains that this is the first time he has controlled something from so far away. It seems he has used one of his last fingers. However, he tells them not to worry because their hope is about to reach its target. At the tip of the object, a finger is hanging, and when it finally reaches the summit, something begins to happen. Then Van states that he will make sure everything works. The bear golem advances toward the dead dragon. It keeps going even as it starts to fall apart, pulling hard on the grappling hook's rope. There's only a little more to go before it reaches the boss. Then it jumps, aiming directly at the creature, and from below Van shouts for it to keep going. Finally, the hook sinks into the dragon, and the golem begins to show signs that it's about to explode. From below, everyone watches. They witness the enormous explosion, and how the upper area begins to crack. Durkino wonders if all of that was just to trap him in that place, and becomes aware of the danger, deciding he must get out of there as soon as possible, and he tries to free himself from the golem. However, Ban, with a satisfied smile, comments that it won't be that easy, adding that the thumb may be slow, but it's the strongest of all. Our protagonist is still holding onto the rope, thinking that this isn't a fight between humans, but between humans and a beast. The area where the creature was defeated starts to break. He reflects that there are beasts that simply cannot be beaten. As he watches the creature begin to fall from above, he clarifies that his goal is not to take down the beast. Just as the defeated dragon falls directly on Durkin, the impact hits him head-on. Despite that, the man can't believe what just happened. He notices that the hook and rope are still attached to the creature, and that they are still anchored up there, which makes everything around them tremble. Our protagonist thinks that it's not necessary to face it in direct combat and, at that very moment, everyone starts to be pulled upwards by the rope. With a satisfied expression, he says to run. Durkin is terrified and can't believe everything that just happened. The group approaches the floating castle running at full speed. One of them shouts to hold on a little longer, that they're almost at the end of the dungeon, and that time is also running out. Only 5 minutes remain. It's tight, but still possible. With a smile, the guy tells Nero that, to be honest, she was a great help. With Nero's strength, he wouldn't have been able to throw that rope more than 50 meters high. And to think they managed it with just brute force leaves him impressed. Remembering the moment the girl threw the rope, our hero recalls that it was truly amazing. She, blushing a little, says it was nothing. Meanwhile, the necromancer is left thoughtful. He reflects that it's something a strong person or even a fool could do. The adventurer comments on it just as Nero glares at him furiously. Be that as it may, this dungeon had someone who clearly stood out, and without a doubt, it was Ban, since he placed the rope in the exact spot and also managed to defeat Dan's very own berserker. Maybe that guy is even better than a mithril rank adventurer. Everyone seems enthusiastic and is smiling. G, for his part, thinks that the other two had probably never completed a dungeon before. However, the joy of finishing one doesn't just come from incredible skills, but from the fact that everyone worked together. Doing it that way is motivating, and that's why he believes the greatest contribution was Petra's. Nevertheless, the adventurer disagrees. He acknowledges that even though the dungeon's supervisor has research skills and did some basic work, the girl was the one who created an incredibly accurate map. Thanks to that map, the group was able to calculate their positions easily. The quality of the work was completely professional, and Petra is glad to know they recognize it. Even so, she considers that looking at the big picture, Nee did an excellent job designing a plan and making it work. Then she wonders if the boy is really a simple porter, and that maybe porters are much more useful than has always been believed. At that moment, Van asks the leader what will happen to Turkin. After everything he did, that enemy should spend the rest of his life in prison, and the group should make sure he never becomes an adventurer again. Petra responds cautiously. She says that while it's true the man did something atrocious, it's also true that he is an adventurer of mithril rank. And the higher the rank, the more immune one becomes to punishment. If someone is at that level, they have very powerful legal protections from the state. The young woman continues, but is interrupted by Nero, who considers all of that outrageous. Petra adds that guy will probably get off tangent-free, and so the frustration of those present becomes even more evident. The martial artist and Ivan grit their teeth in rage. The necromancer, for his part, concludes that even if the law works that way, if they ever meet that guy again, outside a dungeon, he will take care of taking him down again. Naji warns him, that thought is dangerous. After all, Turkin's power was just the tip of the iceberg. He asks them to look around. Those who were defeated belonged to the Rachna clan, the guardians of the citadel's entrance. The adventurer eliminated them all, by himself, adding that they would have done the same if they had gotten the chance. While the two fighters of the group are excited, our hero remains completely serious. He tells them that what comes next is important, and asks them to look closely at the enemy's wounds. They were all destroyed with one single blow. The adventurer's true talent appears when he uses a weapon that is suitable for him. When Turkin fought against them, he used a great sword or his special talents, ending the fights with pure brute force. The power difference was enormous, comments the necromancer, but that makes sense if we remember that he was the one who defeated the false panther dragon that had taken his son. There was a great sword stuck in the heart of the creature, and, without a doubt, the man even defeated the dungeon boss with one single blow. Naji glances back for a moment. Since the guy fell along with the dragon, he had been missing until now. Suddenly, someone is holding a colossal sword with both hands. It's his weapon again, the berserker Turkin has. He returned. Although he seems to be far away, he is unsettlingly close, observing the area where the adventurers are. Very pleased, he declares, "Bingo, it's time to really get started." A red light shines right next to Naji, who looks distressed. "Damn brats," the man says as he launches a slash that cuts the ground in front of our protagonist. Immediately, the young man turns and shouts for everyone to be careful. The slash continues to advance, tearing through the terrain as if it were paper. The attack reaches their position, and they panic, believing that this will be their end. The blow is so powerful that it rips off part of the platform, which begins to collapse, and he did all of that from a distance. Some hands are injured as they desperately try to hold on. There are 4 adventurers who by some miracle are still alive. Injured, Naji asks if they are okay. Petra, the one who is closer, answers yes, while a kind of chain keeps them connected. That same chain extends to Nero, who hears from his companion that the other 2 below are seriously injured. Ban, in particular, was completely unconscious, though he was still tied to the object that was keeping him alive. The protagonist understood, at that moment, that they were in a critical situation. Looking to the side and seeing small stones floating, he couldn't help but reflect on the incredible destructive power of the previous attack. To make matters worse, the enemy had already set itself in motion and was beginning to approach. He wondered uneasily, what kind of power so strange was capable of causing such a disaster? Meanwhile, Nagi realized that if he hesitated for even a second, Durkin would reach them. The group had barely 3 minutes left, and, if he wanted to avoid a catastrophe, he had to act immediately. Trying to gather his courage, he reminded himself that he was a porter. His body had been trained by carrying inhuman weights, so carrying one more load shouldn't be a problem. With that determination, he prepared himself, mentally. This would be like moving one last load, he thought as he clenched his fist tightly. The chain on his wrist began to pulse intensely. By raising his arm, he managed to make the entire group rise up along with him. Convinced, he told himself he would take the lead. He opened his hand as if unleashing invisible claws and began to slowly climb the stone wall. The task was exhausting. Not only did he have to climb himself, but also carry the others. However, the dungeon didn't stop to consider such difficulties. Time kept on running, and every second counted. A short distance away, the ground trembled. Durkin was still chasing them and had made another colossal leap to close the distance. Their time was now shorter than ever. Despite the effort, Nagi managed to reach the top again, carrying the unconscious necromancer with him. The girls followed closely, helping each other move forward. The sand in the hourglass was about to run out when something happened so fast it was impossible to know what it was. The enemy remained tireless, completely focused on its objective. It even seemed pleased by what was happening. Nagi, tense, felt the final seconds approaching. Before him rose the group's destiny, a place that seemed distant, yet so close that it shone with a blinding light. Finally, the adventurers managed to get inside. In front of them floated the dungeon core, the symbol of their mission. Although everyone was injured and exhausted, they knew the end was near. Nagi reached into his bag and explained to the group that all they had to do was destroy it. He took out a sword, threw it with force toward the stone, and declared that once it was broken, everything would be over. The weapon flew straight toward the target, but at that exact moment a loud rumble echoed throughout the place. Durkin appeared arrogantly and leaped into the weapon's path just a second before impact. With his own sword, he deflected the attack. Nagi's weapon fell beside the stone, harmless. The warrior stopped and began to speak, in a deep voice. "Time is up," he said, as a jewel began to crack as if it were synchronized with the floating stone. The explosion was immediate. A massive burst of light erupted from the center, from the failed impact. A red flash erupted and scattered in all directions. Miles away, in a village, a citizen watched the strange energy invading the sky with rage. However, upon recognizing it, he fell to his knees, murmured through tears that they had been abandoned, and began to pray. From the light emerged a creature with red eyes. Another, shaped like a wolf, followed it. Then a multitude of beings began to emerge from what looked like a portal. All of them had monstrous and bloodthirsty appearances. Even a warrior shaped like a shark strode firmly through the portal. Before this sea of horrors, a woman knelt helplessly. The girls understood that the monsters had not only been revived, but were continuing to emerge one after another. It was a dungeon break. In the midst of the chaos, Durkin held Nagi by the neck, watching him with a smile full of satisfaction. He stated with delight that he never tired of watching that spectacle, no matter how many times it happened. It was then that Nagi understood the truth. This was not the first time. Durkin had caused breaks before. The enemy confirmed it without hesitation, explaining that someone like Nagi would never understand. A dungeon that suffers a break regenerates into an even more powerful version, and that means better rewards. Therefore, all of this was happening for something so insignificant, and, consequently, it was clear that the warrior cared nothing at all for the suffering of the people in that city. Mocking the protagonist's reaction, Durkin sarcastically repeated the word insignificant. Then, with a crooked smile, he emphasized that adventurers valued good rewards above all else, and added that he could not care less what happened to those trash. According to him, typical adventurers were not heroes or saviors, but selfish people who only thought about their own benefit. Hearing these words, Nagi thought bitterly that he truly hated that type of adventurer, the ones who combined great power with profound evil. And it was then that he realized the enormous suffering that type of individual brought to the world. He reflected again, this time while watching a bird in mid-flight, as the bird, indifferent to the chaos, continued on its way, flying over the portal. What happened next was completely unusual. as suddenly some adventurers and a black crow beat their wings with violence. Nagi understood at that moment that some people had a deep power within them and at the same time a strong sense of justice. Shortly after, someone became visible on the bird, and surprisingly, that person was eating bread with complete tranquility. While chewing, she serenely declared that she had already marked her target, as her gaze was serene and determined. Then, with agility, she performed a somersault in the air, ready to attack, and with a firm voice, she stated that she would take care of eliminating that rift before it got any bigger. Then she prepared a power with her sword, which seemed to be made of lightning, and launched it directly at the dungeon break, simultaneously striking the shark monster. And the impact was immediate and generated a large cloud of smoke, which unleashed panic among the enemies. As a result, the fire caused by the attack began to slowly take down some of the monsters, and seconds later another strike hit more creatures, cornering the remaining ones, as the beasts were so confused and terrified they didn't know what to do. Meanwhile, Turkin was still there watching everything without intervening, just like Petra, who trembled at the possibility of what might happen. And finally, the newcomer descended to the ground and authoritatively introduced herself as the vice-captain of the Twilight Wind Guild, named Agnesa Ferd, and bluntly demanded an explanation of what had happened there. This woman was no ordinary adventurer. She was a mithril, one of the most high-ranking categories, and even though there were still monsters alive, something strange seemed to be happening with the break. On the other hand, Ni was seriously injured after the fight, and his companion, visibly worried, asked him if he was okay. And he, despite everything, smiled and replied that he was, but added that there was something even more important, so he asked Petra to look directly at a specific spot. And, indeed, it became evident that something was happening at the portal, as what they were seeing with their own eyes was almost impossible to believe. They both watched in amazement as the dungeon break began to slowly close. However, Turkin didn't seem happy about it, even if it was a lower-level break. Still, the man was impressed that it had been sealed with a single blow, and commented that he thought that guild had been completely wiped out. Then, with curiosity, he asked what had brought her there, considering the place had been inactive for 3 years. It was at that moment that the woman began to speak firmly. She called him by his title, Hurricane, of the Dawn Guild, and stated that judging by the scene, no explanation was needed, since, according to her words, it made no sense for a mithril rank adventurer to fail in this dungeon. So she concluded that the break had been caused intentionally. At this, Turkin looked excited and asked if the girl was trying to start a fight, since Agnesa was someone he had always wanted to face. However, he acknowledged that it wasn't the ideal situation, especially considering that Ni Maiden had used more energy than expected. Besides, he remembered he had a strict order from his master not to cause a big scene, and since he had already accomplished his main objective, while grabbing his greatsword, he concluded there was no need to fight. Agnesa, for her part, placed her hand on her weapon and asked if he was running away, since he had turned his back, and he replied calmly, telling her not to misunderstand, as he explained that even the success of a high-rank adventurer depended on multiple variables and that, at that moment, he couldn't guarantee victory. At this response, Petra screamed with all her might that he was a liar and claimed that the man had not only avoided clearing the dungeon, but had also tried to destroy her party. However, he, unperturbed, simply asked if they really believed he had tried to do that. Then, smirking to himself, he stated that perhaps there was some kind of curse in this dungeon that prevents newcomers from distinguishing between friends and enemies. He even implied that because of that, the previous attack hadn't been intentional, which caused even more outrage in the young woman. Next, he said they could check for themselves, but that unfortunately the dungeon had disintegrated into dust. And that explanation, although absurd, seemed to be convincing enough for the association to accept it, and even for someone of white rank to believe it. Of course, all of that was nonsense, but countless times the weight of a mithril rank held more authority than the truth, no matter how many copper or white rank adventurers testified against him, since telling the truth didn't guarantee victory, and worst of all, that guy knew it perfectly, and was taking advantage of the situation. Still, quite pleased, Hurricane said they were done there, and said goodbye, mockingly saying he'd see them next time, calling them pups. Those people stood frozen, watching him as he walked away. Relieved, NG muttered that the dungeon break had been stopped and, immediately after, began to show signs of exhaustion. He collapsed hard onto his knees, leaving the girls worried about his condition. Agnesa watched him for a moment, noticing that the boy had been through a lot and was completely exhausted, besides being covered in wounds. Suddenly, the sound of powerfully beating wings was heard, and someone indicated for them to place the boy there, since Aeon could take them back to the city in an instant. The girls watched as the woman gave the order to the Thunderbird, and that was how the chaotic expedition inside the dungeon rift came to an end. The village saw the morning without a single scratch. Later, the Adventurers Association paid a visit, offering apologies and promising to prevent future incidents, though of course, all of that was just empty words. Thanks to Agnesa's help, our hero was rescued and finally managed to reach the western adventurer city called Belen. Somewhere deep within that beautiful city was the nest where the wind rests, the headquarters of the Twilight Wind Guild. Ji was sleeping like a baby. He slowly woke up from a deep sleep and seemed unclear about where he was, or that he had even fainted. He thought to himself that he had opened his eyes and found himself on a worn-out bed. With effort, he sat up and asked where he was. And right in front of him, Petra was sleeping with her head resting on the bed. Little by little, the girl began to wake up from the sound of voices. Relieved to see him awake, she started asking him how he felt. His other two companions were also present, acting more energetic and saying they had been really scared. Ni, still confused, asked where he was and said he remembered the moment Durkin left, but he thought he had passed out right after. Then, they explained that they were at the Twilight Wind headquarters and that the kind lady had saved him. A priest from the church was even called to heal him, which explained why he had no wounds, only fatigue, and his friends also seemed to be fine. He said that was nothing for a first-class adventurer and that he was confident in his stamina. One of the two clenched his fist tightly and commented that, anyway, since the first adventure under the name Ban had been quite a journey. Then, he proudly said that when he saw the happiness of the villagers after stopping the dungeon break, he understood the true role of an adventurer. A little girl cheerfully handed the necromancer a flower, thanking him for protecting the people. What had started as just another dungeon in search of rewards and glory was these villagers' home. Afterward, they asked for forgiveness for being arrogant to a citizen, and they declared to Nagi and each other that they would become great adventurers and that they had saved a village. Happy. Our hero replied that it was good to hear that. He felt good knowing the group had protected the village. However, now that it was all over, he could finally reveal the truth. In reality, he wasn't a gold-rank adventurer. In fact, he was a lower rank than all of the others with him. He was just a white-rank porter. He wondered if they would treat him the same after finding out and immediately answered himself that, of course not. Nagi began to choose his words carefully and told them that he needed to tell them something and asked them to please not get upset. His friends seemed a little nervous about what they were about to hear. Then, the boy confessed that he had pretended to be an adventurer and had passed himself off as their leader. Naturally, their reaction was understanding. Nero said they understood, that there was no other choice. And just like that, the bond that once existed between them vanished, and now they were back to being just adventurers and a porter. The girl also commented that next time she would ask him to carry the equipment. As they walked away, they told him that the party would be away for a while and that he should get some rest. Finally, they closed the door behind them. Petra asked him if it was really necessary to tell the two of them the truth, and he replied with a smile that they would both become great adventurers while he worked as a porter in that city. He would probably run into them again. He stated that it was better for them to hear it from him rather than find out from others later. The girl felt sad for her friend, but he seemed determined. It was true, he wasn't an adventurer yet, and she, in her job as an inspector, came across many of them. Most of them only cared about their personal gain and wouldn't hesitate to commit atrocities to achieve it. Unlike heroes or warriors, adventurers lived solely for profit, but that wasn't the case with this boy. Even with nothing to gain, he conquered the dungeon. He risked his life with a single goal: to save the villagers without asking for anything in return. That's why, even if you're not an adventurer, Petra said as she took his hand, and she sincerely completed her thought, saying that he was a hero. For an instant, the boy closed his eyes, then snapped them open, thinking in surprise that there was no way he could be that. Meanwhile, all the attention was focused on the conversation between Durakan and Agnesa during the break. The boy looked away and noticed something was happening. A brilliant golden light burst from the rift. It was a lucky day, as this was the reward for having cleared a dungeon break. Nagi walked cheerfully toward the chest that was behind everyone. He pulled out the last ounce of strength to grab it before collapsing from exhaustion. Still, the boy felt truly happy to have succeeded. He kept the entire reward for himself for the second time in a row, and he planned to check it later. However, Petra wasn't the only one who didn't fully understand the boy that day. Neither did the other two. Nero even spoke with his friend saying that their leader was a porter. B asked the girl if she had noticed it too, and she replied that obviously yes, and the necromancer, for his part, added that for, of course, according to them, Nahi was pretending to be just an unimportant porter when in reality he was a gold-rank adventurer. Our protagonist probably thought he had fooled them both or that they were naive, but now the porter knew that they were more innocent than he had imagined, especially since Nero claimed that he would keep the secret. Meanwhile, Durkin was crossing a bridge. A man commented that he had heard some stories and asked if there was interference, which he called a shame. He said that they encountered a strange swordsman and then they got involved with the Twilight Wind Guild. Then, he asked Albuquerque if he remembered Dukin against an Eslo, and added that the Dawn Guild would not overlook those who heard about that conflict, whether it was a fake adventurer or a member of the Twilight Wind. Meanwhile, Agnesa was walking through her guild's headquarters and thought that if what Nahi had told her on the way was true, then Nahi could do something more. She remembered a conversation she had with Petra. Since there was still a little while before reaching the city, she asked her to tell her the whole story, how she got seriously injured and why she was there. Agnesa told her she wanted to hear everything, and Petra, a bit tense, asked if she had discovered that she had entered the dungeon without permission. Mortified, Petra asked how she knew, and Agnesa explained that her party's composition didn't match the official records. Still, she told her not to worry, that it was only a personal conversation between them and that there would be no formal consequences. Then she added that she just wanted to confirm something. Nasa explained that she had been investigating the recent chain of dungeon breaks and that she had found a possible connection to the Dawn Guild and that one had occurred nearby precisely that day. Petra, intrigued, asked what the connection was and Agnesa confirmed it, although she clarified that for the moment it was just a theory, but that any information she could share would be useful. Petra said that if it was something like that, then she understood the importance, but that Nahi's illegal actions had to be kept absolutely secret. In fact, she stated that he should be praised. Then she promised to explain everything that happened, how they entered that dungeon and what happened while they were inside. Agnesa then reflected that the gold-rank adventurer who led them was actually just a porter, and yet they almost managed to conquer that dungeon. She firmly believed that if it hadn't been for the interference from the Dawn Guild, he would have succeeded, and that would have been something incredible under the command of a mere porter. She considered that what most deserved recognition was his mentality, the fact that he had chosen and risked her life to prevent a dungeon break. Our protagonist looked at her and said that she was the one who saved him. Agnesa asked if he was sure, and the boy gave her. The girl said she understood and got straight to the point. She declared that by the authority of Agnesa Ferd, sub-captain of the Twilight Wind Guild, she was ordering him to join her team, smiling kindly. Our hero said that no one had ever thanked him. The Twilight Wind Guild was one of the most prestigious in the city, or at least, it used to be. After the guild leader's disappearance, it began to decline and now, after a long time, a guild meeting was being held. A girl expressed that she was against what was happening, stating that, no matter how desperate they were as a guild, they couldn't just accept anyone. That girl was a gold-rank anchor. Then, someone said out loud what everyone was thinking. Nines, also a gold rank, commented that he agreed and that Agnesa had acted on her own. Furthermore, the man asked if the boy wasn't just a porter pretending to be an adventurer, adding that a porter and a phony didn't exactly sound like anything special. Pororo, a bronze-rank priestess, chimed in, asking if it was really necessary to be so harsh, and declared she was in favor of recruiting him. The girl replied that if she was in favor, it must be because the boy had a pretty face. But Pororo retorted indignantly that it was slander, that she had only focused on healing him, although she admitted his messy hair had a certain style. At that moment, Stone asked them to stop arguing because there was no point in continuing, since Agnesa had already left. He was a bronze-rank tank adventurer, and asked him whose side he was on, while Pororo warned him to think carefully about what he said or he might regret it. Feeling the pressure, Stone began to stammer as he tried to explain his point, when suddenly, someone appeared saying there was no need for debate. Immediately, another woman arrived to inform them that they had been rejected. The entire group was shocked by the news, and seemed unable to believe it. Meanwhile, elsewhere, our hero was in his room. He began to wrap his hands and tie up his messy hair, while saying that everything was ready now. His friend asked him if it wouldn't be better for him to rest a little longer before going out, but he said he was fine and that staying still only made him more restless. She said she understood, but wanted to know why he had rejected the guild's offer, since belonging to one offered many advantages. Our protagonist replied that he was aware of all the benefits that joining a guild entailed, but, on the other hand, getting involved with many people brought headaches, and explained that he preferred things as they were, simple and familiar. Petra told him that if that's what he preferred, she wouldn't pressure him, but she insisted that this was the second time they had crossed paths with the Dawn Guild, and asked if it wouldn't be safer to be under the protection of a guild. He told her not to worry, and added that, in any case, he had come out unharmed both times, and asked if she really thought they would go after a simple porter. She said that it was fine then, and that needed to get back to the association. Our protagonist smiled and thanked her for everything, but she told him that she was the one who should be thanking him. She told him that if he ever needed anything, he should go see her at the association. Our protagonist was thoughtful for a moment, but then he smiled softly and nodded. Excited, he thought about checking the reward before leaving, since he really wanted to know what he had gotten, imagining it could be a weapon or something valuable. So he opened the bag and called for Gluttony. He practically dove into the bag while asking where it had gotten to. He started rummaging around, asking where it was hiding, until he finally found the little creature. Our protagonist asked it why it didn't appear when he called and questioned the strange expression on its face, but the creature replied that it was nothing. Then he asked if it had seen what was inside the chest and what kind of reward they had received, but the little one said there was nothing. Naji commented that it sounded a bit suspicious, but Gluttony insisted that there was nothing strange. Still, our hero didn't seem convinced. He told the creature to move aside so he could check for himself. While the little one shouted no, the hero began to open the beautiful chest, wondering what kind of treasure he might find, but he was suddenly completely astonished by what he saw. Then he asked, what were these things? He wondered if these creatures were the offspring of some kind of being, but what intrigued him most was understanding why they were inside the chest. He asked Gluttony what was going on and what had happened to the reward. Gluttony looked a bit tense. It then explained that it hadn't done anything wrong, that it was just organizing the bag as usual, and that when it opened the chest to tidy things up, it noticed there were items inside that looked like stones. Then, suddenly, one of them started to crack, and a small hand came out of it. The creature was fascinated by this, and, out of nowhere, those little beings were born. Our protagonist thought that if that story was true, then they must be stone monsters. He knew that some people with a talent for taming creatures might want to buy them now that they had hatched. However, they didn't seem like the type of creature a tamer would want, and that was a problem because he needed to replenish what he had used in the dungeons. Therefore, he wondered what he should do with these little beings. At that moment, Gluttony said they were unfortunate creatures because it had heard from them that their parents were exploited by the dragon snake and begged to be allowed to raise them, promising it would take good care of them. So, our hero decided that maybe they would be useful, and that they would keep them for now. He told the little one to take care of them, but clarified that if they started causing trouble, he would have to let them go. Excited, Gluttony said it had received permission and added that they could stay there. Our protagonist appeared slightly tense upon seeing this. Suddenly, alarmed, he asked it to wait and asked if there were more than 3. In the next scene, he was already out of the bag. Tense, he realized it was complete chaos inside. He saw that the reward from the dungeon rift was a total failure, but at least there was still the reward from the Plum Cave dungeon. Excited once again, he decided to go exchange those items. He arrived at a trading post. He was selling all his magic stones and monster loot. The old man there handed him a bag of coins. Satisfied, he said it had been a long time since he'd earned so much money, so he would restock his supplies first. He bought smoked mushrooms and finally got some explosive mushrooms that he couldn't afford before. He also restocked his food provisions, sharpened his weapons, and replenished his flash bombs. He set aside a portion of the money to give to Vananero, and finally, with what was left, he thought that maybe he could go on a little culinary tour for himself. Yes, he walked happily through the city while someone watched him from a distance, wondering if it was really him, questioning if this was the young man who caused trouble with the Dawn Guild. This person thought it was just a rumor, but now he saw that the boy was really white rank. He thought that sending really weak individuals to prison was one thing, but he had heard that the boy managed to face off against Huracan. So he asked what Zero thought, wanting to know if the boy seemed strong to him. That shadowy figure said that it did happen. 2 times couldn't be a coincidence, and that even someone who is white rank can be powerful, so they had to be careful. He explained that normally he wouldn't care about someone who was white rank, but that this one in particular might have a hidden skill. Then he said that he had expectations and hoped the boy wouldn't disappoint him. He readied himself from a rooftop and took a powerful leap forward. Our protagonist was walking peacefully through the city, enjoying the moment, until he suddenly seemed to notice something. The stick of the ice cream he was eating snapped in half and that man grazed his face with a powerful attack. Nahi shouted, asking who he was. Excited, the man said that he was starting with hostile intent and added that the young man was already reacting. He said he was sure that Nino was not just an ordinary porter and that now he was intrigued, since there was something more and that this couldn't be the end. Meanwhile, our hero simply smiled, wondering what that man was talking about. Without warning, he attacked again, and G barely managed to dodge the blow. The opponent demanded that he stop holding back and show what he was capable of, saying he wanted to see the skills he used to challenge his guild. Our protagonist became slightly tense at the situation and wondered who that person really was. He noticed the emblem on the man's chest and realized he was a gold rank mage, but he found it confusing that he fought like an assassin. Our protagonist felt all his hostility and understood that he couldn't just stand still, so he decided to act and took a weapon out of his bag. His opponent asked if he was now ready to get serious and said he wanted to see what kind of sword techniques he had used to face Jeff. Then, our hero charged with some mushrooms tied to his sword and used a special set of tools for porters, specifically, a low-grade explosive mushroom bomb. Suddenly, a massive explosion occurred. Smiling, he said that only a lunatic fights head-on against adventurers, and now he decided it was time to run. As he ran, he thought he was going to die. He started to scream in the middle of the street, begging for help, asking for someone to save him, shouting for the guards, and saying that someone was trying to rob him. A guard approached and asked what was happening. He pointed and said that man was a thief, pretending to be an adventurer, and that he had tried to kill him. The guard looked somewhat surprised by the accusation and asked if that wasn't Nade from the Dawn Guild. The man remarked with disappointment that the boy had fled. Our protagonist wondered if this was the revenge Petra had mentioned, but he still thought it was crazy to do something like this in the middle of the city, no matter how angry they were. The guard apologized to the man and asked if he could ask him about the incident. The man smiled and asked what incident he was referring to. Then he launched himself from the ground and asked if he was perhaps referring to this. In an instant, he reached our hero and asked if this was about a little lesson. Naji took a heavy blow and was sent flying into a wall. The man explained that he had heard that boy poisoned members of his guild, ruined a dungeon, and was nothing more than a simple porter who harmed his guild. He added that everyone knew what happened when someone messed with the Dawn Guild. Our protagonist shouted that that was a lie. Then he started shouting, explaining that it was the members of that guild who tried to kill him, begging them to believe him. The people around him simply watched. He grew a bit tense, thinking that there was no way out and that Petra was right. The guild had considerable influence, so in this situation, no one would take the side of a white rank like him, because helping him wouldn't benefit anyone. Then someone commented that they had heard something similar, but our hero knew it was better for them to support the Dawn Guild. Some mentioned hearing that a porter had been tricking adventurers, and another added that these days, porters acted as if they were the leaders. The guard told Naji that he understood the situation and that, in this case, he would leave everything in his hands. The man replied that he was satisfied with that. Smiling, he asked what he thought of all of it, if he had imagined how things would end and that there was no one there who was on his side. Our protagonist asked why he was going so far, saying that he already knew the truth, that his guild was the one that was in the wrong. He added that it was all over and asked why he was seeking revenge now. The man said that he was right, that it hadn't been his fault, but that nobody cared that low-level adventurers fought over anything. However, in the end, he had still harmed their guild, and the Dawn Guild doesn't let go of even small losses. That was their way of making sure everyone saw and remembered to be afraid. Anyone who hurts the guild will pay the price. He was just a tool to make sure everyone remembered that fact. But he told him not to worry, because he wasn't going to kill him. He explained that he wore the medal of the last man he killed, but that it would be a waste to carry a white medal, since there was no prestige in showing it. So that day, he was just going to mark him so that every time people saw the scar on his face, they would remember what happened that day. Then he activated one of his assassin skills and lunged at our hero. He used a cross-shaped slash that almost hit him. He thought there was no one there who would be on his side, but suddenly that attack hit something. He thought he was just seeing things, but a woman appeared in front of him. She ordered the man to lower his weapon. She explained that he belonged to the Twilight Wind Guild, and added that from that moment on, any attack against him would be considered an attack against them. Ji was walking through the empty city streets, followed closely by his shadow. That thing asked him if he was really okay with leaving things like that. It said that this wasn't the outcome their guild would have wanted, but the man explained that there weren't many options. Facing Agnesa wasn't in his plans. He stated that even if he had faced her alone, it wouldn't have been a big deal, but someone had already taken care of Agnesa's debt. He then added that even so, in the end, the whole thing left him with a feeling of emptiness because he expected the kid to do a little more. For a porter, he was above expectations, but a porter was still just that, another insignificant guy. Of course, things ended abruptly, but after being chased like that, he was probably really shaken up, and his shadow agreed. The man smiled slightly as the shadow asked what else there was, and then a small cut appeared on the man's face. He wondered how that happened, if it was Agnesa who managed to hit him, but his shadow asked if he hadn't noticed yet. It told him to do something slowly. He should retrace his steps step by step so he could remember what had happened. It told him to think back to the very first moment he encountered him. Meanwhile, Ji began to remember the attack he made as our hero was dodging up to the moment when the kid pulled the weapon from his backpack. The shadow said that the moment Ni thought he had finished him, that exact moment when he believed it was all over, it said that Ji thought the kid had completely given up. He remembered that X-shaped slash aimed directly at the kid. Then the shadow continued, saying that the kid did something that showed he hadn't given up and had been waiting for that opportunity. Then, our hero pulled a hidden blade from his sleeve, already prepared to counterattack. The shadow explained that even in that situation, He used the fact that Nji was above him and pulled out a hidden weapon. In his memory, our hero stood motionless as the attack approached. At that moment, he remembered that no one in the world would side with a porter and that he had to protect himself. So at that decisive moment, the kid threw the weapon at his opponent. That strike went right past the man's attack and grazed the assassin's face. The shadow asked how many times it had told Nji that the moment you think you've defeated the enemy is when you let your guard down and become vulnerable. The assassin said that he had really let his guard down this time, but he seemed excited and said that was interesting. He added that maybe he would take back what he said about feeling empty. Then he and his shadow seemed satisfied with the result, deciding that they would meet again, with him in person. Moments later, our hero tucked his weapon into his sleeve, thinking that he had prepared that dagger in case he couldn't pull weapons from his backpack, but that still wasn't enough to be a real adventurer. He thought that if Agnesa hadn't helped him, he probably would have been in real danger. He questioned if the Dawn Guild had really sent an adventurer of that level just for some trivial revenge, and he honestly didn't want to cross paths with him again. Suddenly, someone spoke to him, asking why he had that thoughtful expression. Jokingly, he asked if he was scared, saying that after what happened, he would probably be haunted by those memories. The guy explained that that kid was notorious even within his own guild for being a troublemaker. He even controlled a gang of thieves, and the guards turned a blind eye. The stone man laughed and said he had heard a little about the guild, but he didn't think they would stoop so low as to attack someone like that out of spite. Agnesa said she agreed, and that's why she thought they would be safer in a dungeon than staying in the city. That's why she brought them there. She then asked why he didn't at least join the guild for raids, but our hero said he preferred to continue his usual job as a porter. Nahi asked if he didn't feel it was starting to get a little cold. He said it was his first time seeing a cemetery inside a high-level dungeon. This was a B-rank cemetery-type dungeon. One of the guys started to laugh and asked if he was scared, adding that dungeons like this were like a walk in the park for them. He told him to just trust him, the Great Nines, and focus on collecting all the loot while following his lead. Our protagonist thought he wasn't wrong, because even though this was a B-rank dungeon, they had gold and silver rank adventurers, and one above them all. That was the mithril rank member. And having a mithril rank member on a raid was practically overkill, but there was still one concern. In a high-level dungeon like B rank or higher, it was crucial to form a balanced team to overcome the dungeon's challenges, but in their case, they were all warriors, and when a team leans too heavily in one direction, it's difficult to handle unexpected obstacles. Then, suddenly, Agnesa orders them to stop. She comments that it seems the dungeon is giving them a welcome, as a group of undead zombies appears in the area. These creatures watch the group of adventurers, and without showing any concern, the woman prepares for combat. She unsheathes her sword and takes a battle stance. She declares that she will clear the path. Then, with a powerful strike, the undead begin to be cut in half. In the midst of the flames, she looks back upon perceiving something that catches her attention, and more enemies charge towards her position. She attacks them again, and once more, she unleashes an arc of fire in front of her, spinning her weapon, defeating all the enemies surrounding her. 2 or 3 of the monsters can't withstand the fire attack and begin to burn. But then, from within the flames, a gigantic creature emerges. That giant zombie stares intently at the adventurer and lets out a furious roar. Our protagonist comments that for a B-rank dungeon, they're already facing medium-sized monsters right from the start, and Nines enthusiastically cheers the girl on. The monster lifts a huge block of stone and tries to crush her with it. After that, it lunges at the adventurer, but she dodges the attack once again, leaving the creature looking foolish. In the next instant, she's already behind the monster, ready to strike. Then, she activates a magic sword talent called Ignonian. The monster can only watch, unable to react, as she lands her first blow. With a swift movement, she strikes it from behind and then unleashes a series of rapid attacks on the creature, which has no chance to defend itself. The monster roars, feeling all the wounds and the fire. She uses her magic sword skill called Blooming Flowers. In the midst of the flames, a fiery flower blooms and then explodes, dealing massive damage the next instant. The party just watches the whole spectacle of pyrotechnics. Our protagonist says that's mithril level, and everyone watches as if they were seeing a blockbuster movie. Nahi admits that his worries about the team composition were ridiculous. He comments that he has seen many adventurers, but he's never witnessed such a powerful talent. A talent is an essential trait for an adventurer that allows them to use special abilities linked to their class. Each talent varies enormously in capability, and there's one more reason. The reason why adventurers can face such powerful monsters, especially in the mithril rank, is because they master those talents beyond all comprehension. Agnesa says there's no time to hesitate, and that they must move quickly before those things resurrect. Then she starts running ahead. Resurrection is the major difference between graveyard-type dungeons and other types of dungeons. The The monsters in these dungeons are usually considered weak compared to others of the same rank, but the difficulty lies in the fact that these creatures can resurrect no matter how many times they're defeated. So the monsters you've already defeated will come back to life and relentlessly pursue the adventurers. Therefore, if your pace is too slow, you can easily end up surrounded on all sides, which makes your chances of clearing the dungeon very low. And that's the reason why a priest is normally included in the party, someone who can perform permanent eradication or use holy water. Both are crucial, but also expensive. That undead creature that had been defeated lets out a furious scream as it resurrects. Nines comments that the revived monsters have already caught up to them. He points out that he told her they should have brought Poro, and our hero asks what he means. He explains that there's a priestess in their guild who is like a permanent resident. He says she's a demon in disguise, and that she always demands gold for anything she does. She always demands an absurd amount of gold to join expeditions. A demon disguised as a priestess cries, asking if the guild is so poor that it can't afford someone like Poro. Agnesa tells him to save his complaints for later. She says she'll take care of the enemies coming from the front and asks Stone to slow down the others, the creatures coming from behind, and tells the adventurer Nines to just stay back and watch, maybe cheer them on or something. Our protagonist asks if Nines isn't going to fight, and the guy seems a little embarrassed. Then, he starts talking about his weapon, saying that he ended up leaving it behind. Hearing that, our hero looks at him in disbelief, but the guy justifies himself by saying everything was very rushed, so mistakes happen. In response, Agnesa comments that it happens to him all the time, that he's always forgetting all sorts of things, while her companion recalls the raid where he completely forgot his gear. At that moment, Nji starts to laugh and says it's okay, that he has a pretty big supply of weapons. Then he asks what kind of sword he prefers, and, while pulling several swords from his bag, he asks if a longsword would work since he's a knight, or maybe a bastard sword. At that offer, the guy is surprised, quickly approaches our hero, and grabs him. Immediately after, he gives him a powerful headbutt and calls him a fool. As a result, our hero falls to the ground, asking what the hell is wrong with him. Right away, Nines tells him to listen carefully, that he only fights with his own sword, Elizabeth Probast. Then, he explains that it's his vow as a knight. At that moment, our hero sits there, not fully understanding, wondering what's wrong with this crazy guy. However, suddenly, the stone man shouts that something isn't right with the monsters following them. Then, he points out that there are fewer than expected and, moreover, they are moving very slowly. For her part, Agnesa also seems to notice something strange. The creatures are walking, but it looks as if they were stuck to the ground. Looking closely, it seems they have something stuck to their feet, so she asks if those are tacks. With a smile, the hero replies that it's nothing special, and adds that those monsters revive anyway, right? Besides, he explains that the most dangerous part of this dungeon is getting surrounded by resurrected monsters. While they could kill them again, that would only slow their progress. For that reason, he used a porter's tool, a trap to keep them slowed down. Then, he says that's why he placed those tacks along the path as they advanced. He confesses that he thought it was a crude tool that wouldn't help much. Nevertheless, the group seems surprised by this, and says he's more useful than Nines, to the warrior's despair. Afterward, the group runs through the dungeon, wondering how many more times those enemies will revive. Frustrated, Nines says that if he had his weapon, none of this would be happening, while Agnesa replies that now is not the time to complain, because they must escape before they get surrounded. Then, someone says they can see the end of the cave. She shouts the signal for the stone man to act. Immediately, he activates a shelter-type talent called Stone Shield. Suddenly, several walls rise in front of him, and the creatures get trapped in them. However, more monsters approach, but they can't get through. He shouts that it's done, but clarifies that he won't be able to keep them safe for long, so they must get out quickly. Finally, they reach the underground area of that dungeon. At that moment, Nines wonders what kind of dungeon has a huge lake blocking the path. But our hero replies that at least there's something useful, a raft waiting for them. Then, Nine mocks him, saying that this dungeon sure is considerate. Anyway, if they want to continue, it seems they have no other choice but to take the raft before the zombies arrive. Next, Nine says it's a trap, that the raft won't support the weight of all that heavy armor, and Agnesa tells him to take it off, since he's not going to fight. Our protag says that he agrees, and asks him to take it off. The man is stunned, then he tells Sir Nine and Sir Stoneman to put their armor on the raft. Both of them obey and take off all their armor, leaving them in just their normal clothes. Agnesa watches the scene, then starts to get tense and yells while blushing, asking how much more they're going to undress, and Nine replies that it's to reduce weight. Meanwhile, Stoneman comments that he's seeing this again. The next moment, the group is already on the water and they continue crossing the lake. Suddenly, 9 starts to laugh and remembers that Agnesa let out a scream, so he teases her by saying that even she screams. But in the next instant, his face is swollen and he has a black eye, as he apologizes. Then he adds that he'll make sure to wear proper clothes. She says that as if that weren't enough, he also left his weapon behind, and now he's useless. He says that if he had the power of a vow, he could still pull off all those moves, even though he sometimes forgets he's gold rank. Annoyed, she says that's exactly the problem, asking why he made a vow he can't keep. Finally, our hero reflects on what a knight's vow is. Adventurers with the talent of a knight make a vow that represents their beliefs. This vow creates absolute rules that they must follow, but in exchange, they gain great power. For his part, 9 made a vow that he would never fight with a weapon other than his Elizabeth Roast, and because of that, he must abide by this rule. In exchange for that vow, Elizabeth Robast becomes an unbreakable legendary sword. The knight's vow is, literally, a trade-off. Then, our hero comments that a knight's vow isn't considered a weakness, wondering why most of them keep it a secret. Agnesa replies, "That's normal. That guy talks way too much, and there's no one in this city who doesn't know it." Even so, he insists that he and Elizabeth are invincible. However, Agnesa says that he always forgets it. She adds that he's always a fool, so she'll let it slide this time. Then she comments that she's heard about that bag, and that it's truly amazing, asking if things disappear when you put them inside. Then, 9 clarifies that the weight doesn't disappear completely, but that the moment something is stored, a powerful weight reduction magic is activated. Even with 2 full sets of armor, it would still feel very light. Hearing this, Stone says that's much more impressive than 9's sword, especially because of that turkey they ate earlier, which was delicious. He adds that he never imagined eating something like that in a place like this. The boy affirms that they're right. Even Agnesa was busy chewing on bread while rolling around with that zombie. The girl blushes a little and says she didn't have a proper moment to eat. She counters by saying that he was just resting while she hunted, and he defends himself by saying he did his best, while another asks if he's on vacation. Then our hero asks them to wait a second and adds that it looks like something is about to happen. Agnesa seems to notice it too, and in the next moment they are surrounded by multiple boats, each one packed with zombies. Everyone notices the enemies as the boats begin to approach. He says that the raft was a trap, designed to drown adventurers, and the girl adds that fighting on a raft definitely puts them at a disadvantage. In disbelief, 9 asks if she knew it was a trap and still got him on that raft, and the girl simply confirms that yes, she knew. She clarifies that this is a dungeon, that they weren't going to put a raft there just to help him. 9 is then surprised to learn it wasn't meant to help. Agnesa reflects that the problem is that even knowing it was a trap, there are too many enemies, and right now she's the only one capable of fighting. She believes that even if she went from boat to intercept them, their raft would be turned into a pincushion by arrows before she could get there. Then, someone suddenly says to leave it to him. He explains that whatever is out there on the water is strong, so they need to be fast and break through it. She asks if he's saying that his bag can help them, and our hero excitedly replies yes, but adds that everyone needs to hold on tight. The whole group is surprised by this. Then, he uses the air compression technique, followed by the air injection technique. In the next moment, a huge gust of wind bursts from inside the bag, propelling the raft forward with a massive blast of pressure. Agnesa asks if that's wind magic. Our protagonist says it's nothing as elaborate as magic, that he simply compressed air inside and is now releasing it. He explains that he discovered that if he left the bag out on a windy day, he could capture and store that air. In any case, when he releases it all at once, this is what happens. One of the undead prepares to shoot an arrow. Then they start shooting at our heroes. 9 holds his bag firmly and speeds up the raft even more. The creatures are bewildered by this. The girl tells him to wait a moment and asks if he's looking ahead. He explains that they've blocked the entrance with a wooden barrier, concluding that those zombies prepared a rather meticulous trap. Agnesa wields her weapon and says she'll clear the way, but our hero asks her to wait and says that they have the advantage now. He adds that he will help too, since fire and wind have good synergy. As he prepares to imitate her, she thinks that he gets it. Our protagonist takes his bag and gets ready. Then they perform a combined fire and wind technique. That whirlwind of flames advances towards the barrier. The creatures can only watch helplessly until they are finally hit by that powerful attack. The barrier begins to crack and catch fire, then it explodes into several pieces. Amidst the flames, some logs appear, and the group continues on its way on their makeshift raft. With their leader proud and satisfied with the result, they finally reach their destination. She asks if everyone is there, commenting that they barely made it in time. Apparently, he assesses the place and says it seems to be the location where the dungeon boss must be. That's the bastion of the death zone. He expresses that things have escalated incredibly, as it's a fortress inside an underground tomb. 9 says it doesn't matter how good they are, and questions if this doesn't seem a bit too difficult for a B-rank dungeon. Meanwhile, the Stone Man points out that normal parties would have already failed. Then he asks why their guild always takes dungeons like this. Couldn't they just take an easy one for once? But their leader replies that this was the job they accepted. The Stone Man comments that their guild usually handles dungeons that others fail to clear, but our hero replies that he doesn't care, since he's just a porter. Agnesa, however, points out that even in a B-rank dungeon they can't let their guard down, as they often have troublesome bosses. And sure enough, it seems the boss is finally appearing. The undead creature asks how they dare while its eye begins to glow with energy, stating that they have entered its paradise and calling them fools. This boss is a lich-type monster. Nines asks if they're serious, that there's a lich in a B-rank dungeon, and says that this is just their typical bad luck, while his companion mentions it's the first time he's seen one. This type of monster belongs to the mage category, and enemies like this usually come with many unpredictable factors. She thinks she's already spent a lot of energy fighting alone so far. Therefore, she unsheathes her weapon thinking she must take it down before something unexpected happens. Then she leaps towards the creature, which simply watches her with a smile. Most undead monsters are irrational and blindly attack their prey, but this one just watches because a lich is different. It's a creature that seeks knowledge even after death, and in that instant it was analyzing Agnesa, quickly understanding that she made a deliberate frontal attack to protect her allies behind her. Then, she strikes it with fire, and at that moment it finds its answer. The girl is surprised to see the creature disappear, and something begins to materialize above them. The elite lich now floats, appearing above the group, calls them foolish creatures and, using its power, orders them to become its servants. Agnesa yells for them to get out of the way. Then that crimson energy expands. Our protagonist can't believe what he's seeing and, in front of him, the energy and chains spread throughout the room, forming a powerful magic attack. As he thinks they might be facing the worst possible scenario in this dungeon. Suddenly, Agnesa stops and begins to smile strangely. Our protagonist realizes she has just become an enemy. Nines tells the Stone Man to take Nagi and run, but his companion asks him what he's going to do, since no matter how strong he is, he won't be able to stop Agnesa, and tells him they should just escape. However, Nines doesn't seem to agree, charging towards his opponents. Nines asks what he's talking about and, with an excited expression, says that a knight never turns his back on an enemy. He says that no matter how strong Agnesa is, she has already spent a large part of her power and that her flame is dwindling. He adds that it's no surprise she handled almost the entire dungeon alone, and that he could say that it was all part of his plan, Nines' grand plan, and that at this point he could face her even with his bare hands. The woman begins to prepare for combat and channels her energy into her sword. Nines positions himself in the middle of the hall, ready for the fight. He also begins to concentrate for it. But in the next moment, it seems things aren't going as he had planned. Agnesa lunges at him and lands a powerful, flaming blow. He takes the hit head-on, thinking, "What the hell was that?" and wonders how she still has so much power left, as she prepares for another attack that barely misses this time. He keeps dodging as best he can and the girl doesn't give him a single moment to think. He repeats to himself that a knight never retreats, holding on to that mantra. Then, in the next moment, he activates an unlikely knight talent called Retreat. The other members of the group start running back to get away from the girl, when suddenly Nines appears asking them to wait for him. Our protagonist says he thought Nines was going to fight her, and the man replies that he was just kidding, asking how anyone could think he would be able to face Agnesa. For his part, the Stone Man says he didn't expect much from him anyway, since he had already turned his back on a bunch of undead and is now using the same excuse that he doesn't have his weapon. Then, our hero calls the group's attention and asks them to look over there. At the water's edge, some boats are arriving and he says, all the undead have just appeared. He adds that they are completely surrounded. The Stone Man thinks that there are too many, while Nji says, this is bad. There are tons of undead outside, and glancing behind him, he comments on the inside, adding that Agnesa is there too. Immediately after, the Stone Man takes a step forward and says he will try to buy them some time. Then, he uses a talent to create a powerful shield, and all the surrounding rocks begin to rise from the ground. He starts to use his stone barrier talent against Agnesa. The girl simply watches without any expression and notices the approaching rock. She quickly jumps from where she was and begins to use the rocks themselves to boost her movement. She jumps from one to another, continuing on her way. The Stone Man thinks that was exactly what he expected Agnesa to do and that she is too fast. He can't hit her with a single blow. Our protagonist is impressed by all of this. He thinks that there must be something that, even for a brief moment, can stop Agnesa in her tracks. But he knows it must be something really good, because a half-baked trick won't work on her. So he reaches into his bag and gets an idea and, throwing something at the girl, He thinks that maybe this will work. The object flies past her without hitting her, but it somehow catches her attention just as our hero activates his porter's secret technique, a skill called seek and take. Then, Agnesa starts jumping after the object that looks like a small delicious pastry. She stops for a moment, satisfied, savoring the sweet. Nahi says she had a hunch that even under mind control, she would still act on her most basic instincts. Nines can't believe what he's seeing, but adds that he knows they won't be able to keep her still for long, so he shouts for everyone to find a place to hide inside the fortress. A while later, he's completely out of breath and comments that it seems like, for now, she isn't chasing them. Meanwhile, the rest of the undead are climbing the hills and trying to regroup outside the fortress. Nahi says they need to make a plan, but Nines replies that it won't be easy. He states that Agnesa is being helped by that lich. He comments that she should have been almost out of ether after clearing the dungeon, but since she was fed the lich's magic, her flames returned. He adds that if it weren't for that, he could have defeated her on his own, and the stone man says, "Yeah, right." Then Nines asks, "Well, what is this place?" But our hero says he doesn't know. He explains that judging by all the weapons on display, it looks like some kind of armory. But Nahi comments that those aren't weapons the undead would use, so she thinks it's something else, and that this place looks more like a trophy room. Nines and the stone man are surprised by this information. He explains that intelligent monsters like liches sometimes collect the belongings of fallen adventurers as trophies, which probably explains all of this. Nahi thinks that the structure of this dungeon is quite challenging for their level. With a lich as the boss, it's not surprising that many raid parties have failed here. But there's something she still doesn't understand. Why are there children's toys and items that clearly don't belong to adventurers scattered around? The stone man says that he once heard a story, and, as he mentioned before, they usually take on the dungeons that others avoid, and when this dungeon first appeared, it became notorious for repeated failures. But strangely enough, after that, people from nearby villages started to disappear. He continues, saying that they didn't notice anything unusual while they were exploring this dungeon. But then there's this. Our hero is surprised and says, "An abduction dungeon." Then he asks what his companion means. Is he saying that the monsters leave the dungeon and kidnap civilians? Nines becomes enraged just thinking about the kidnapping. Then he says that the dungeon hasn't broken yet, and questions if the monsters aren't supposed to be trapped inside. Our hero comments that that's just a theory, since abduction-type dungeons are incredibly rare. Normally, monsters in a dungeon can't leave their area, and there's a theory that says monsters, outside a dungeon's barrier, lose their strength, which is why they can only escape through a dungeon break. He adds that in this case, there's only one way to confirm it. They must defeat that damned lich and see for themselves. He adds that there's no other option, and that he's going to do it, and that he will kill the lich, because a knight cannot stand idly by in the face of injustice. Yeah,